March 17, 1956, 2:14 a.m. Bumpy Johnson stood at the window of his brownstone on 146th Street, watching 32 Riot police load shotguns across the street. They weren't hiding. Commissioner Stephen Kennedy wanted him to see this. The plan was simple. Dawn raid. Every number joint, every policy bank, every safe house in Harlem. Kennedy had warrants for 47 locations. He'd mobilized the largest tactical operation in NYPD history. 600 officers, military-grade equipment, press cameras ready to capture Bumpy in handcuffs. Bumpy had 3 hours. 3 hours before they kicked down doors and dragged his entire operation into daylight. 3 hours before Harlem's economic backbone got shattered. 3 hours to make a single phone call that would either save everything or confirm Kennedy's prediction that the King of Harlem dies at sunrise. What happened next changed the power structure of New York City forever. But to understand how one phone call stopped 600 cops, you need to know what pushed Commissioner Kennedy to declare war on the one man Harlem would die to protect. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1956. He wasn't just a crime boss. He was Harlem's shadow mayor. While white politicians ignored the neighborhood, Bumpy kept it running. When Mrs. Washington on 135th Street couldn't make rent, Bumpy paid it. When police harassed black-owned businesses, Bumpy made it stop. When Italian mobsters tried pushing heroin into Harlem schools, Bumpy declared war and won. His numbers racket employed 300 people. Poor folks bet nickels and dimes on 3-digit combinations. When they hit, Bumpy paid out immediately. No delays, no excuses. His word was currency. By 1956, Bumpy controlled 70% of Harlem's underground economy. That's roughly $4.2 million annually passing through his operations. But here's what made him different. He reinvested in Harlem. He funded black businesses the banks wouldn't touch. He paid for funerals families couldn't afford. He sent neighborhood kids to college. Harlem wasn't just territory to Bumpy. It was home, and he protected it like a father protects his children. But there was a problem. Commissioner Stephen Kennedy had just taken control of the NYPD 3 months earlier. He'd made a campaign promise to Manhattan's wealthy elite: clean up Harlem, make it safe for urban renewal. That was code for pushing black folks out and handing the real estate to white developers. Kennedy needed a win, a big, public, media-friendly win, and taking down Bumpy Johnson would make him a hero to everyone who mattered in city politics. Kennedy had studied Bumpy for months. He knew about the numbers racket, the policy banks, the network of runners and collectors. He'd built an airtight case: federal warrants, state backing, Mayor Wagner's blessing. What he didn't know was that Bumpy had been studying him right back. Stephen Kennedy was a different kind of cop than Bumpy had dealt with before. Most police in New York were transactional. You paid them off, they left you alone. Simple, clean. Kennedy wouldn't take money. He was an ideologue, a true believer in law and order who saw Harlem's underground economy as a cancer destroying the city. He'd been appointed commissioner by Mayor Robert Wagner specifically to be incorruptible. Before that, Kennedy had run Brooklyn's organized crime task force. He'd taken down dock workers, union bosses, and corrupt politicians. His reputation was spotless. The newspapers called him the Boy Scout with a badge. Kennedy had 400 officers loyal to him personally, not cops on the take, not guys you could buy. These were hand-picked enforcers who shared his vision of civilized New York. He'd spent February and early March building his case against Bumpy. Surveillance teams photographed runners. Undercover officers documented betting locations. Federal prosecutors prepared racketeering charges that carried 20 years minimum. On March 16th, Kennedy held a press conference.
He stood in front of 20 cameras and made a declaration. Tomorrow morning, the criminal empire of Ellsworth Johnson ends. We will dismantle his operation piece by piece. Harlem will be free of organized crime by Easter. The reporters ate it up. Kennedy declares war on Harlem crime boss, ran on every front page. That afternoon, Kennedy called his tactical commanders together at one police plaza, 32 men in a windowless room. He spread a map of Harlem across the conference table. Simultaneous raids, dawn, every location at once. Kennedy tapped the map with his finger. I want Johnson in custody before breakfast. I want his lieutenants in interrogation rooms by lunch. I want every record, every ledger, every scrap of paper that proves his operation. Lieutenant Frank Morrison asked the obvious question. What if there's resistance? Harlem might not take this well. Kennedy smiled. That's why we're bringing riot gear. If Harlem wants to defend a criminal, they'll learn what happens when you stand against the law. He assigned specific teams to each location. Building 47 on 145th Street, the Rhythm Club on Lenox Avenue, the barbershop on 135th that ran numbers out the back, Bumpy's own brownstone. What they didn't know was that Lieutenant Morrison was on Bumpy's payroll, and by 8 p.m. that night, Bumpy knew every detail of Kennedy's plan.
Morrison called Bumpy at 8:47 p.m. from a payphone on Canal Street. "It's happening," Morrison said. "Dawn raid, 47 locations. Kennedy's treating it like D-Day." Bumpy listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions. How many officers? What time exactly? Does Kennedy have federal backing? The answers were bad. 600 officers, 5:30 a.m. simultaneous entry, and yes, federal prosecutors were standing by. Bumpy hung up. He lit a cigarette and stared at the ceiling of his brownstone. His wife, Mamie, watched from the doorway. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that running won't work," Bumpy said. "Kennedy wants a show. If I disappear, he raids anyway and locks up everyone who works for me." He had 3 options, none good. Option 1, fight. But that meant guns, dead cops, dead civilians, Harlem burning. That's exactly what Kennedy wanted. It would justify martial law and total federal takeover. Option 2, surrender, walk into Kennedy's office with his hands up. But that meant abandoning 300 people who depended on him. It meant leaving Harlem defenseless against whoever moved in next. Option 3, make the problem disappear. Bumpy chose option 3. At 11:30 p.m. he made calls, not to other criminals, not to corrupt politicians. He called business owners, church leaders, union representatives, people whose names carried weight in communities beyond Harlem. By 1 a.m. he'd built a coalition, 37 respected voices from across New York, all willing to vouch that Bumpy Johnson's numbers racket employed people, fed families, and stabilized a neighborhood the city had abandoned. But that wouldn't stop Kennedy. The commissioner didn't care about context or nuance. He cared about his legacy. Bumpy needed leverage, real leverage, the kind that made powerful men reconsider their decisions. At 1:53 a.m., Bumpy remembered something, a conversation from 6 months earlier, a favor he'd done for someone connected, someone whose gratitude might be worth more than an army. He opened his address book, found a number, stared at it. This connection was nuclear. If he made this call, there would be consequences. People would know Bumpy Johnson had access to power that shouldn't exist in criminal hands. It would change how everyone from the FBI to the Italian families viewed him. But if he didn't make the call, Harlem would wake up to martial law. At 2:14 a.m., standing at his window watching riot police load shotguns, Bumpy picked up the phone, and then he dialed. The phone rang 3 times. A voice answered, groggy, annoyed. "Do you know what time it is?" "Mr. Hogan," Bumpy said calmly. "It's Bumpy Johnson. I need 5 minutes."
Frank Hogan was the Manhattan District Attorney, the most powerful prosecutor in New York, the man who'd sent dozens of mobsters to prison, the man whose political career had been built on fighting organized crime. He was also the man whose daughter Bumpy had saved 6 months earlier. August 1955, Hogan's daughter, Patricia, had been grabbed outside Barnard College by 2 men trying to ransom her. They'd picked the wrong neighborhood. Bumpy's people spotted the car. They intercepted it on 125th Street. The kidnappers were found tied to a lamppost 3 hours later with Patricia unharmed in Hogan's living room. No press, no police reports, no ransom paid. Hogan had offered money. Bumpy refused. "Just remember, I don't hurt innocent people," Bumpy had said. "That's the difference between me and the men you usually deal with." Now, at 2:17 a.m., Bumpy was calling in that debt. "Commissioner Kennedy is about to raid 47 locations in Harlem, 600 officers, riot gear. He's looking for headlines, not justice." Hogan was silent for 10 seconds. "Kennedy's within his legal authority." "He's going to start a war," Bumpy said. "Harlem won't let him take me without a fight. You'll have dead civilians and burning buildings by lunchtime. That's not law and order. That's a massacre for political points." "What do you want from me?" Hogan asked. "Make one phone call," Bumpy said. "Tell Mayor Wagner that this operation will cost him Harlem's vote. Tell him that if Kennedy wants me, there's a way to do it that doesn't involve terrorizing an entire neighborhood. Give me 48 hours to turn myself in peacefully." "Why would I do that?" Hogan said. "You're a criminal." "Because you know the difference between justice and revenge," Bumpy said, "and because your daughter is alive because I made that same distinction." Silence. Bumpy waited. He watched the riot police across the street, watched them check equipment, watched sergeants brief their teams. 3:05 a.m. now. "If I make this call," Hogan said slowly, "you turn yourself in. No running, no fighting." "I have your word," Bumpy said, "and you cooperate, full transparency on your operation." Bumpy paused. That was asking a lot. Full cooperation meant exposing his network, but it also meant protecting them from a violent raid. "I'll give you names and locations, but nobody gets hurt, nobody loses their job unless they committed actual violence. The folks running numbers aren't criminals, they're just trying to survive." Another silence. "I'll make the call," Hogan said finally. "You have 48 hours.
He hung up. Bumpy set the phone down. He looked at Mamie. "It's done," he said. At 3:47 a.m., Commissioner Kennedy's phone rang. He answered to hear Mayor Wagner's voice. "Stand down the operation," Wagner said. "Sir, we're 90 minutes from execution." "Stand down." Wagner's voice was ice. "Hogan just explained what your little show is about to cost me politically. You want Johnson, build a case that doesn't require military occupation of an American neighborhood." Kennedy's face went red. "Hogan, what does the DA have to do with?" "Bumpy Johnson has agreed to surrender peacefully within 48 hours, Wagner said. "You'll get your arrest, you'll get your headlines, but you'll do it my way. Call off the raid. That's an order." The line went dead. Kennedy stood in his office, surrounded by tactical maps and operation plans. He'd spent 3 months building this, his moment, his legacy. And one phone call from a criminal to a DA had dismantled it in minutes. He picked up his radio. "All units, stand down. Operation canceled." Across the street from Bumpy's brownstone, the riot police lowered their shotguns. They looked confused. Sergeants shouted orders to pack up and move out. Bumpy watched from his window as 32 officers loaded back into vans and disappeared into the night. Mamie stood beside him. "How did you know Hogan would make that call?" Bumpy smiled. "Because I saved his daughter, and because Frank Hogan is one of the few people in this city who understands the difference between law and justice. Kennedy wanted a war. Hogan prevented one."
"And now you have to surrender," Mamie said. "I was always going to surrender," Bumpy said. "I just needed to make sure Harlem didn't burn down when I did."
March 19th, 1956, 10 a.m. Bumpy Johnson walked into the 32nd Precinct wearing a tailored suit and no handcuffs. He'd surrendered exactly as promised. Commissioner Kennedy was there. So was the press. So were 50 officers expecting to see a broken criminal. Instead, they saw a man who'd negotiated his own arrest. Kennedy processed him personally. The whole time his jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. He'd wanted a spectacle. Instead, he got a peaceful surrender that made Bumpy look dignified, and Kennedy looked like a bully who'd been outmaneuvered. The press coverage was split. Half the papers praised Kennedy for taking down a notorious criminal. The other half asked uncomfortable questions about why it took the Manhattan DA's intervention to prevent a military-style occupation of a civilian neighborhood. Bumpy's trial happened 4 months later. Frank Hogan personally negotiated the plea deal. Bumpy pled guilty to racketeering, 3 years in Sing Sing. In exchange, no charges against any of his 300 employees. Harlem didn't forget. While Bumpy served his time, the neighborhood protected his operation. His wife Mamie kept the numbers running. His lieutenants kept the peace. Nobody flipped. Nobody cooperated with Kennedy's follow-up investigations. When Bumpy walked out of Sing Sing in 1959, Harlem threw him a parade. Commissioner Kennedy retired in 1961, his reputation damaged by corruption scandals that had nothing to do with Bumpy. Turns out, several of his incorruptible tactical officers had been running their own shakedown operations in Brooklyn. Frank Hogan never publicly acknowledged his phone call to Mayor Wagner, but years later, in a private conversation, he told a colleague, "Bumpy Johnson understood something most criminals don't. Power isn't about violence. It's about knowing whose respect matters more than whose fear." The story of that night became legend in Harlem. The night Bumpy stopped 600 cops with one phone call. The night he proved that intelligence beats force. The night a criminal taught a police commissioner a lesson about power.
Here's what this proved. Bumpy Johnson survived for 40 years in the deadliest game on earth because he understood one fundamental truth: relationships matter more than weapons. Kennedy had 600 officers, federal warrants, and the full weight of the NYPD. Bumpy had one phone number, and that phone number connected him to a man whose daughter he'd saved. A man who valued honor and justice over headlines. That's the difference between a thug and a strategist. Thugs rely on fear. They control through violence. They think power comes from how many guns you have or how loud you can yell, and they always lose eventually because fear has an expiration date. Strategists build networks. They earn respect. They understand that saving someone's daughter is worth more than owning 100 cops. They play a longer game, and when the moment comes, they make one call that changes everything. Bumpy didn't win that night by shooting his way out. He won by being the kind of man Frank Hogan couldn't refuse, by proving that he understood the stakes, by offering a solution that protected everyone, including Kennedy, from the consequences of ego-driven decisions. That's power. If this story got you hyped, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if you respect how Bumpy played this, because we're just getting started with these untold Bumpy Johnson stories. I want to know, what would you have done with 3 hours and 600 cops coming for you? Would you have fought, run, made the same call Bumpy did? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Next week, we're telling the story of how Bumpy walked into a meeting with Lucky Luciano and 5 Italian mob bosses, unarmed, and walked out with control of Harlem's heroin trade. You're not going to believe what he said that made the most dangerous men in New York back down. Until then, remember, intelligence beats force, strategy beats violence, and respect beats fear every single time.